Good morning, good night, good evening, whenever you are tuning in. This is Tasemere, your host of the Blackout Live from New York. Just for folks that are visiting, this segment is about celebrating Black folks across the diaspora and to have an open dialogue about Black economics, how we reimagine trends in business and explore the magic that we have. So today we're going back to some basics. I got my girl Kenyetta S Rose in the building. For folks who are not familiar with her, she is a reoccurring or returning commentator, and we usually just have dope conversations. She's also the founder of 6th Gen Venture Studios, based out in Colorado. So Kenyetta, welcome.
Hey, there you are.
I'm so excited to have you back. I actually, for folks that don't know, Kenyetta and I talk like almost daily, if not daily, sometimes multiple times a day. So earlier this week, we were in this dope conversation, and I was like, you want to talk about this on the show? Like, come back to the show. So we're going to be talking about privilege today and what that means. So, Kenyetta, welcome.
Hey guys, wherever you are.
Hey.
Buenos dias, hola, bonjour, from wherever you are tuning in the world. Those are the only ones I know right now. I'm going to work on that for next time.
So you want to kick us off because you're the one who brought up the privilege conversation that we were having the other day.
I will provide context. I don't know if it was me that brought it up, but I think the context is you were talking about a young lady that's going to be interning for you.
Yes.
And I think I had mentioned that, and I'm not sure that it's true for everyone. It's just my personal perception that I'm not sure that a lot of African Americans have the ability to take on an internship that doesn't pay. And then I talked about my own personal experiences and people that I know that generally when you're either in college or out of college, that a lot of times you're in a household where there's a single woman or there's no man around. And so you're being asked to make contribution to the bills. And then you said that you were privileged because you didn't have to do that. None of your siblings had to do that. And then I started a whole conversation about privilege because I talked about a company I work for where pretty much working alongside people that wanted to purchase these condos. And I had noticed that a lot of the white applicants were getting down payment, not really necessarily assistance, but they were actually getting down payment gifts from their families. And then a lot of times the Black applicants had to take out a loan for a down payment. I'm like, that's the bare minimum for purchasing a home. You're not able to do that. And so it seems like we kind of segue into a whole conversation about privilege. And you were saying, well, privilege is one, having the ability to live at home with your parents and not have to pay bills. You also said that you had the support of your mother and that made you privileged. And then I started thinking, well, all right, I wasn't privileged in that manner, but when I think about Eva, my daughter, 8-year-old, she may be considered privileged. And then we started this whole conversation about what is privilege. So to get us going, I will go over some notes that I had jotted down.
Yay!
And then we can take it from there. So some of the things that you said that I really liked is you said when you compare your access to someone else's access, your privilege disappears. Also, before we proceed, we should say that there is a such thing as white privilege, and you said that required an entirely different conversation.
Yes. So when we were talking about privilege, I felt like the white privilege conversation was a separate topic because that brings in confines of total institutions, especially when we're thinking about in comparison with particularly Black people, because that's what we're going to talk about, because we're both Black, so we can only infer what we think happens with other groups of people. But I think privilege is also things that we don't necessarily think about, right? Like when I was sharing, like I didn't have to worry about paying bills. My mom didn't allocate, I now was responsible for X amount of rent and X amount of food and all of those other things that I've heard other people say, like once I turned 18, I had to, start contributing to the household, right? My contribution was like, I'm going to school, right? And I might have been working, but I definitely wasn't making any kind of money to contribute to household bills on a monthly consistent basis. Like I would pick up things for the house, but it wasn't like mandated that that was something that I had to do. So in that context, perhaps I was privileged compared to someone else who had to do those kinds of things.
Tasemere, question: are you hearing a little bit of feedback on my end?
A little bit.
Okay, because I'm hearing feedback from you, and it's probably coming from me.
Is it fixed?
Let me give you another one that we can keep talking. I need about 30. Okay. Is that good now, or is it still feedback?
Okay.
No, it's still feedback?
No. Oh, a little.
A little?
Well, I'll keep going. And then that brought up a whole conversation about what are we looking at when we are thinking about privilege, right? What is the definition that we're looking at privilege for? Because I even said, our kids, Kenyetta and I both have children, our children might be considered privileged.
I have to borrow Eva's headphones. Is this better?
Yep.
Okay.
Our children might be considered privileged at some point, but it's always in comparison to what, right? Like in comparison to who. So maybe privilege is more of a standpoint of access, because I was like, well, what would happen if we think that we're giving our kids everything possible? Like we think that we have set them up, we're giving them life experiences, they're traveling, like they're like living their best life, and then maybe they meet someone else and their parents have more money or their parents have more access. If our kids now compare themselves to a different class of people, does that mean that their privilege that we've worked so hard to give them now disappears because in another circle, maybe they don't have what someone else has? So now they feel like they are no longer privileged. So then that had us going back and forth of this whole concept of what does privilege actually mean? And when do you lose the privilege, right? Like when is the privilege no longer there? And then Kenyetta brought up, well, what about white privilege? And I was like, well, I think that that's a whole different topic, because like we're talking about just privilege on like pure privilege versus privilege compared to white people, which is a whole nother conversation in itself.
Yeah, I think as I'm hearing you talking, I think that this conversation is going to end up being very spiritual. I think that this is also brings up when you hear people say attitude of gratitude. Let me give you these 2 points and let's take it from there. But I had my dentist, who is a blessing to me, said something to me that I kind of had grappled with after he said it. He said, I brought up the word privilege. I don't remember the context in which I brought up the word privilege, but whatever I said, his response was, I guess in a way, to an extent, we're all privileged. And coming from a white man, I kind of jolted and said, I don't know, can he say that? But it got me thinking. I mean, when I think about how he's helped me, I mean, it's dental services, but it's really important to me. I said, you know what? I think that he's right to an extent. I think that we all are privilege. Again, he obviously has more than I do, but just keeping it very basic and just talking about privilege. So to lay the groundwork, let me just give you the points that we came up with, and then we're going to take it from there. So Tasemere said, when you compare your access to someone else's access, your privilege disappears. There's always going to be someone else who has more access. Constant comparison to what you have to what someone else has is a recipe for disaster. And the last point that I want to bring up is, outside the context of white privilege, just speaking on privilege in of itself, privilege is relative. So when I was living in Brooklyn, under some very not ideal circumstances, I would have said Eva was not privileged, but now I'm in Colorado. Eva goes to a great school. We're in a really beautiful neighborhood. I mean, I wake up to the mountains literally every day. Eva gets to go on play dates. She gets to travel. She's traveled out of the country. We travel every year, sometimes multiple times a year. It's generally we travel, twice out of the year. Some would say that she's very privileged. And I think, and from that perspective, she is. But when I start to compare her to other kids that maybe live in a 2-parent home, I start to feel like the privilege is diminished. And I'm not sure that spiritually, emotionally, and psychologically, that that's a healthy way of looking at life. And so what you said to me really resonated, because it got me thinking about, okay, I understand what people are talking about when they talk about an attitude of gratitude and really looking at what you have and being excellent on your level and not comparing yourself to other people. Because in a manner of speaking, we really all are privileged. I think we're so used to, you hear things, people say like, well, there's somebody in the third world country that's starving. And that you hear that so much that it kind of loses its value. But I think to be here, to be in a country where, all right, so I think anybody who was born in the 80s, any Black person who was born in the 80s, you are a superhero to me. I'll speak about myself. So I'm from a single-parent home, born and raised in Lafayette Garden Projects in Brooklyn. At a time where there was lots of violence and chaos. I consider myself so lucky to have made it out of that. Most women do. The males, there seems to be a different story. But to have been born in those circumstances, I consider myself very privileged, because I had a grandmother who, her mentality when it came to education was, I will spare no expense. Like, if it's to get you tutoring, it's to put you in private school, it's to send you off to college and send you money whenever I can, I will spare you no expense. So although I would look at other people's lives and say, yeah, but they're in a home, they have a father. Again, looking at other Black people, not white people, just looking at other Black people. If I saw someone that maybe had a 2-parent household, or they were growing up in a house, I would look at them, and for years I diminished what was given to me. But but after our conversation, I just sat outside and I really started meditating on what areas in my life have I not been really putting the light of gratitude on it, because I've been comparing it to someone else. And I would say, relatively speaking, I was very privileged. My first time getting on the airplane, I was 5 years old. And almost every year after that, I was on the airplane. My family owned land down south. And so every year was in Alabama, all of the family comes together on land owned by family, and we would convene and just have fun and parties. I don't think a lot of people get to experience that. So in that context, I am privileged. So I think we as a community have to revisit, I think what you said about giving too much credence to the word white privilege, that we have lost a sense of how privileged and blessed we really are. That's really why that conversation took the form that it did. And I just wanted to, I'm like, we have to do a full conversation on that, because a lot of us really are privileged. We just have to stop comparing the access to someone else.
I agree with that. That's the standpoint that I take, because I feel like we all are born into families that have certain things and don't have other things, right? Like, everybody has that. Not every family structure is going to be perfect, and you might not ever get every single thing that you ever wanted or you look at someone else and they have it. And so now you're like, dang, I also want that too. But I think it's our disposition about it. I grew up very similar to you in ways and not in other ways. Like I grew up also in NYCHA housing, which is low income housing in New York City. That's predominantly Black folks. That's predominantly paints this picture of violence and chaos is happening there.
And a lot of it is true.
And a lot of that is true.
Especially
right?
in the 80s and the 90s.
But unlike Kenyetta, I didn't get on a plane until I was graduating from college. Unlike Kenyetta, I didn't go on family vacations every year because my parents were working 12 hours a day and my mom never really took vacation. She would put in her vacation time and still work through her vacation. So in my household, everyone was always working. There was no such thing as taking a break or traveling. I don't remember my family owning land anywhere, doing any of those things. When I was in college, my parents were like deathly afraid for me to travel out of the country. I didn't travel out of the country until I was like 25. Was my first international flight. My first actual flight was in New York State. I got on one plane in Syracuse and came back to JFK at 21. That was really my first time being inside of an airport, right? So when we think about privilege in this conversation, Kenyetta has experienced things a lot earlier in life than I experienced. But that doesn't necessarily diminish the privilege that I feel like my parents gave me, what they had the ability to give to me, right?
That we said that you have. One, a supportive mother who supports entrepreneurship.
Oh, she's a ride or die.
Is not common in the African American community. The African American community's mantra is find a good job with benefits. So let's talk about the privilege that you did experience. By the way, the first time I traveled overseas by myself, I was 33 or 34 years old, and I had Eva.
So it's so like to go back to Kenya, like my mom is totally ride or die. I know people say that, but my mother like lives by that. And her lifestyle of her childhood, nothing says that she should be this much of a risk taker, this much of a supporter, because my mother grew up almost as an orphan, right? Her mom died during childbirth. Her dad died when she was maybe like around 6. She was raised by her older sisters, right? And really struggled a lot to get anything that she got in life. And my mom doesn't have a high school diploma. So those are like the disclaimers of my mom, right? But my mom is definitely like my biggest cheerleader. It's like when I told her I wanted to quit my job and I wanted to work for myself, she was definitely like backing that 1,000%. Even now, if I call her and I'm like stressed about a contract or confused about whether to take on a client, like she's totally there, thinking through solutions with me, helping me figure out like what to do, how to be more confident about my price, how not to feel like I'm not adequate enough to charge what I want to charge. She has definitely helped me when people have been trying to make me feel like my look wasn't together, my presentation wasn't together. I've had conversations that I've shared with Kenyetta of people really questioning my intellect, right? Like, you do not have these things. And that's a privilege for me to have a very supportive parent that I can always go to, that I know has my back like 1,000% and will fight for me even at an adult age and I have my own kid. She's still like, hey, I'm going to push you to do what you want to do and dismiss anyone that says anything otherwise, right? But we also talked about my mom being very secure in herself and knowing that there were lots of things that she was missing. So I grew up with having an actual village. And I know that that's a term that we often use, but it's not really implemented in ways. But I grew up having an actual village where I actually have like at least two other moms, right? I have my mentor, Glenda Grace, who is, we joked and say that she is my mom is her surrogate, but she is like another mom. My mom defers to Glenda quite often on parenting things, on, you know, whether I can do something. When I was smaller, I had to get permission from her. Up until when I was pregnant with my son, she definitely, you know, allow Glenda to step in and take on a very parental role during that time because she was unable to answer certain questions or advocate for me in a certain way. And so Glenda became this person that my mom gave parental guidance to and shares in being grandparents to my kid, right? And so to me, that's privilege because a lot of people don't have that. So where I lacked in having like money or like tangible experiences, I feel like my mom particularly made sure that I did grow up feeling like I had privilege in other ways that I don't think other people have that. Like I don't think other people could say I have, you know, 2 to 3 moms, right? That my mom is totally okay with me calling them my mom. And it's not because they're my stepmom. And she shares her grandparent role with at least 3 other women that aren't parental parents to me and Elijah's dad. So that's, you know, that's interesting. And to me, that speaks to privilege.
I definitely envy that. I wish I had a village growing up. I think I would have been, yeah, I would have made a lot better decisions. But in recognizing that I didn't have that is one of the reasons why I know this is going to sound counterintuitive, why I left New York and came to Colorado, because I said, all right, New York is the kind of place where you need protection. And a lot of our kids are not protected in New York. But I mean, yeah, that I'm envious of that. I would have loved to have had that. A village, multiple moms. I'm telling you, I envy that. A mom that supports you, that's your like your ride or die, who believes in you, who believes you. My mother, if you're not working a 9 to 5, she ain't trying to hear it.
Mm-hmm.
Her thing is the only people who can. I probably shouldn't say this, but her thing is the only people who can run businesses are white people. And if it's you, you shouldn't try it. That's her philosophy in life. And yeah, man, I would pay for that to have a mother
Mm-hmm.
who supported my endeavors. I would pay for that. But before I pull out the violin, again, this is why it's important not to compare your access to other people. I will say what my mother did give me was she lacks in some emotional support and just support overall and believing in me. When I think about it, and again, I went back to after the conversation, I went to meditate on privilege. I think what I did get too that a lot of people take for granted is I feel a sense of entitlement. I know that's very strange coming from a Black woman. Like I feel a sense of entitlement. And let me explain what I mean. So growing up, I always got whatever I wanted. Like very rare will the words no ever said to me. If they were ever said to me, I would time it so that eventually I would get a yes. Right? I got an allowance. I had money to shop whenever I wanted to. I got money. My mother has maxed out credit cards for me. I'm talking about maxed out. Like, I want these $300 BCBG shoes, and I'm not taking no for an answer. And someone say, okay, but that's materialism. That's not important. Okay, yeah, that's true. But here's what it did for me. One is I very rarely take no for an answer in life. Like if somebody tells me no, I do the same thing I did when I was a kid. I time it and I wait until I get a yes. when I go out into the world, like I walk out into the world with the assumption that I'm going to get whatever I want, because that's how I grew up. It's if I want it, my mother or my grandmother were going to figure out how to get it for me. And so I take that, because that was given to me as a kid. It's like it's infused into my way of being. Like when I walk out to the world, like there's, I'll give you an example. There's times where last 2 years ago, I took my daughter to visit her father in Texas. Perfect example. And we went into the museum, and the tickets were like $70 for each of us, right? And he looked at the prices, and he was like, I could see like the fear over, because I'm for the three of us, I guess it was out of his budget. And it was kind of out of my budget too. I'm like, I don't really want to pay that, but I'm going to get these tickets. Like I'm going to get in this museum. I don't know how, but I'm going to get in there. And it's a little example, but like I can see how that has played out in other areas of my life. So we go up to the counter, and I start negotiating with the woman. I say, all right, well, listen, I'm from New York. I work with DOE. Can I get a discount? And I just kept at it until eventually we got in there for $13. All of us. Right? So like I can see how like a lot of areas of my life where, because I don't take no for an answer, or because I'm constantly negotiating, how I generally, for the most part, I tend to get. Now, my goal right now is to scale that, right? To scale that and to bring it into larger areas of my life, such as, without going into the whole thing. But like for the most part, I take a sense of, I'm not taking no for an answer. If I want it, I'm going to get it. Right. And that is privilege, because a lot of us don't feel that way. To be a Black woman and feel a sense of entitlement, like you're not telling me no. Like I didn't get the support, but like I got that sense of, if I want it, I'm going to get it, because my mother and my grandmother gave that to me.
Well, also, I feel like as Black folks, we have a lot, and across the diaspora, we have a lot of different experiences to pull from that make us feel like we have some sort of privilege. But now to talk about the question of white privilege, that all disappears. Like when you say white privilege and you put so much power on that phrase and that term, now Black people kind of retreat back and say like, well, I didn't have this and I didn't have that, and this person is white, and so that means that they're automatically going to get all of that confidence kind of like dissipates. And it turns into like, I think in a way it turns into almost a giving over of power, I want to say, because you already feel like, when we constantly repeat this rhetoric, and it's not wrong, it's
self-actualizing.
Yeah, but when we constantly say, you've had 400 years ahead of us, or your family did this and your family did that, all of these lessons that we did learn from our family or from our village of like what to stand on kind of disappears, in my opinion, when we start comparing it to white people. And that makes me feel really disheartened. Not because I want to say forget everything that has happened, especially in this country, and our racial issues that we have yet to reckon. But I just feel like it takes away from all of the confidence and encouragement that is almost instilled into us, and we kind of shrink because we feel like we can't, I don't know, like we just feel, and I can say I have had this happen too. We talked about earlier, like I'm getting interns for my company, and I'll be honest, I was a little afraid to get interns in general. Like, oh my gosh, like I'm growing, I'm gonna have interns. This is such a big responsibility. But I can openly say when I had to interview white candidates, I was nervous, as me being all confident in everything that I have going on and standing in these experiences that my village has given to me. I was a little uncomfortable, right? I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm feeling this whole internal struggle is happening here. And I know my experiences working with Black folks, working with white folks, working with all these people, Asian people, Indian people, all the folks across, across racial lines. But for some reason, when I had to interview white candidates, I felt a little nervous. So much so, I had to call my mom and say, like, I don't know why I feel this way. Like, I didn't feel this way when I had to interview anybody else. And I'm feeling very uncomfortable. And I don't know why this is, right? And I think that it's because we psych ourselves out with this term, whiteness, fill in the blank. And I don't really know why that happens.
That was jam-packed.
I'm just trying to be transparent.
I will give my personal experience. I agree with you that we relinquish our power by constantly speaking. I don't personally use this term because I believe that when I believe that we speak things into existence, and there is a such thing as collective consciousness. And every time we speak something, we keep speaking something into collective consciousness. So I don't use the W supremacy phrase. You know what I'm talking about? I don't speak it. But recently I did start using white privilege, and I noticed that I relinquished power into it with the company that I was with last time. And it became so real for me that I allowed myself to become a victim to it. And that's not really how I think. But because that's the rhetoric amongst the people, I kind of gave into it and said, oh, yeah, it is real. And when I agreed that it was real, I allowed myself to become a victim of it.
Mm-hmm.
And it cost me money.
Yep.
Like, it became so real for me. I'm like, it's you guys, you have this and you have that. Whereas I never really thought about stuff like that. Like, I just always thought being a Black person means that you're somewhat, in many ways, a god. Being a Black person, to me, as a descendant of Africa, I believe I'm a direct descendant of Africa. Not direct, but a descendant of Africa. The richest place in the universe, that wealth, power, and so many other things are stored up in my DNA. Like, that was my mantra before. But when I allowed myself to become a part of the whole rhetoric of white privilege, then I started to lose that power. Right? That belief lost its power over me, and I became, it's kind of like everyone else, subject to victimhood. So,
I think that happens more than we actually give it, more than we actually admit that, right? Because I think that it's so polarizing, right? That we start to think, and we start to see things from this whole other lens that maybe it's existing and maybe it's not, right? Because to be quite honest, a lot of my opportunities that I have gotten has come from white people, right? Like, they have
naturally it would.
In certain ways for me. They have been supportive of certain things that Black folks weren't supportive of, right? Like, they have stood in the trenches with me in many cases, but it's also this mindset that I think that starts to it's almost like it's complicated, right? Because it's like all these different feelings and almost having to be very real with yourself about what is happening and why you are having certain feelings. And it's not to say that sometimes someone is being, racist to you. Sometimes that is exactly what's happening. Sometimes that's not, right? But if we stick in this white privilege like landscape, we only see it from a certain perspective. And that becomes the storyline that we feed to ourselves almost every day, right? That we stand on the pulpit and we talk about it so much that it becomes like embedded in just
it's a self-fulfilling prophecy,
right?
Self-fulfilling prophecy. Yeah.
And I think that that's a little dangerous. I just feel like that's a dangerous place to stay in. At the same time, erasing the privilege that your village worked so hard to embed into you. Like, it would be very disheartening to me for me to think about all the things that I'm thinking about doing and am doing for Elijah, for one day for him to feel like he doesn't have privilege because he's Black. It almost erases all of this intentional work that I am instilling into him to have that not be a factor, for that to become a factor, right? So I'm like, it's a struggle. It's not that I don't want to acknowledge what's there, but I don't want to give it so much power that it erases like all of this work and all of these affirmations and all of these experiences, whether I had them, I didn't have them, I saw that someone else had it, and I'm like, hey, when I have a kid, I'm going to make sure I give my kid these things. And I'm thinking that I'm kind of like erasing this notion of you're going to feel like you're not as good, you're not as smart, you're not as capable, for him to bubble up one day and feel like he can't do something because he's Black would be heartbreaking to me. So I'm trying to check myself in these terms that society has labeled as things that, you know, we say, and kind of put it in its proper place, and like when to actually activate that term, or make that, or maybe I never activate it around him. Like maybe I act like this thing just, you know, straight up doesn't exist. It's not part of our household. It's not part of our thought process. Like we are not even going to go down that road. We're going to stick with Black excellence and be the best that we can be. But it's something that is very fearful for me, because I also know how hard I'm working. And you know, we talk about these things quite often, like working super hard to not make this a reality. So I can't make it a reality for me either.
It's tough, and I don't have the answers. I know what I'm doing with Eva, and those in my
Eva goes horseback riding. And I remember when you first told me that, I was like, I like horseback riding too. I like to do that too. And we don't really, you know, these are things that's a privilege, because how many kids' parents pay for horseback riding lessons? Maybe there's a lot, maybe there's not that many, but that's an experience that she's getting because you are actively, you know, making sure that she has that experience. So it's hard. I just feel like it's a hard, this is the privilege of the hard thing.
I think you're doing a great job. And I think with like most of us, the time will tell. Well said. I mean, just everything that you just stated, just well said about the affirmations and self-actualization and focusing on Black excellence instead of focusing on white privilege, because one of the laws of the universe is whatever we focus on expands. So if you keep focusing on white supremacy and white privilege, and of course it's going to take over your life. At the same time, I don't think that we should ignore the emotional damage that it may cause at various points in our lives. I want to share something that Dr. Boyce said a while ago. He said, you should consider yourself lucky that you were born Black, because at this space and time, there's so much work to be done. He said for them, all the work's been done. That's why they're constantly searching for adrenaline rushes, right? Because all the work has been done. But for you to have been born Black in this space and time, there's so much work to be done that it adds so much purpose to your life. And the reason why I bring that up is because in spite of the privilege and the supremacy, I don't like to use that term. I really don't. I just don't. I don't like that term. Because why not just say Black supremacy? Like, it used to exist. Don't be afraid to use that, right? Like, why do you keep speaking power into white supremacy? Why don't you speak Black supremacy? But I bring that up because I think it's a beautiful thing to be born Black, because it just gives you a sense of purpose. Like, you come here and you look at the world, and you're like, wow, for us, there's so much work to be done. And that just adds so much purpose. Whereas if you come here and you see that for a race, all of the work has been done, it kind of eliminates a sense of purpose to me. And I think having a sense of purpose in and of itself is a privilege. So I know you're going to close out. I just want to leave it with that, because everything that you said was just well stated. I don't think I could follow that up. That was just, I'm telling you, it was just well stated, not becoming a victim to that, not allowing it to become a part of your reality and dictate how you move in this planet. I did that recently only because that's why I've taken a break off of social media, because I follow a lot of Black power pages. And everybody's thinking and posting the same thing. And I started thinking and posting the same way, in a way that I normally wouldn't even think. And like, it cost me. So I'm retreating right now to really look at what mindsets are holding me back. Making sure that I'm not following the herd mentality. Sometimes I think that we're all downloading from the CPU, the same CPU, and there's a virus on it. Like, we're all downloading from the same CPU, and I think there might be some malware on there.
Well, I think that's true. You know, I think that's true. I think that a lot of it, and I don't want to say that I think that we live in a kumbaya world, because I don't. Like,
we most certainly do not.
And anybody that knows me and has had like in-depth conversations with me know that I'm very aware of what's happening. I just am so dogmatic about focusing on me and my actions that I kind of put all of that on the back burner, right? Because it's so many issues to unpack just in the diaspora of Black people. And then there's so many issues to unpack in the US, right? So it's not that I don't see these things happening or I'm oblivious to it. It's just that I don't really understand what purpose will it serve me in particular to focus on those terms, because that takes me off track. I just feel like it's a distraction in itself, because then my actions aren't for me to be a better person. My action is to kind of get validation from another group that may or may not ever give me validation. So a long time ago, I've learned to not seek validation from someone. I think I'm smart, and that's all that matters, right? I think I create amazing work and amazing products, and I think my intellect is dope. And that's a period at the end. Like, whether anybody else agrees with that or they disagree with that, it does not change what I think, right? I'm like, I know that I know this, and I know that my work is great. And that's it. Because the moment that I feel like I'm looking for anybody else, a Black person, a white person, an Asian person, an Indian person, a Native American person, or whoever, to co-sign something that I believe to be true about me at my core, I've already have lost. Because yeah, the validation might feel good, but then what if that same person turns around and says, like, I don't like what you're doing. I don't think that that's smart. I don't think that you're capable. What happens to that? And what happens to me in that process if I'm looking for someone else to co-sign what I'm doing? And I've experienced that in a real way. And we've talked about it. You know, my last full-time job, I went in there and I was like, I'm going to be the best employee that I could be, right? I'm gonna prove that I'm worth every penny that this organization is paying me. And it wasn't a whole lot of pennies, but I was like, I'm gonna prove that I know this. And for the first maybe 2-3 years, my boss thought I was dope. Like, she was like, you're great. And I felt really good about that, until she didn't think that I was good anymore. She didn't think that I was as capable. She questioned all of my judgment. She questioned how committed I was to the job. And then on the day, like I've shared with you, I practiced my resignation. And at the time that I handed in my resignation letter, she basically told me that my work was a piece of shit this entire time. So all of that validation of looking for, like, this validation of someone co-signing something that I already knew to be true about myself, walking in this privilege that my mom had given to me and my village had given to me, I kind of gave all of that up to another person to validate what I was doing and what privilege I actually had and what I was capable of. And this was another Black woman. So to keep it like a buck, this wasn't
I got you.
an other, right? This came from another Black woman that I thought, would have my back, because we're in this struggle together, right?
That's why
we're in this struggle together. How could she not how could she not see me in her and me see me in her, kind of thing, right?
That's another conversation.
For her to take all of that away,
right,
and the resignation taught me something powerful about this whole comparison and this whole assumption and these terms that we give to other people to validate what we feel, what we already know to be true about ourselves. So from that moment, it was like, I'm never going to do that again. I'm always going to walk in knowing that I'm capable, I'm smart, I live in my privilege, whether it's a lot, whether it's a little, I have it, it's mine, it's what my village gave to me. And I'm not going to allow anybody else to come and make me feel incapable. So that's why I'm so dogmatic about this privilege, this white privilege, this all of this, because I feel like there's power in that, and it can really break you down. I had to really look within because in the moment I was like, wait, is she saying I'm not smart? Is my work crap? What's really happening, right? I lost a lot of confidence in that moment because I felt like she had given something to me that I already had, because my village had already gave that to me, and she took that from me, right? So it took me a while to really, sit with myself. And one, I had to check myself that I gave her way more power than she even ever deserved to have. And why did I feel like I needed that? And so I think that going back to Black folks, I think that sometimes we're looking for this okay from other people. And I think that we compare what we don't have to what somebody else has, and we put more credence on what somebody else comes with, not understanding that we come with stuff too. We come into the table with something too, right? We got things going on also. And so I think that we just have to focus on the privilege that we have and understand that other people have other experiences, but it doesn't cancel out what we also come with, because I think that we just start working backwards from there.
I can't follow that up.
I'm just saying,
that's a mic drop. I think we can end it there on a very high note. I do want to just put in this last point, probably has nothing to do with privilege. I'm very careful about accepting praise from people for that reason. I don't know if you ever noticed, sometimes people will give me praise and I'm a very calm mouth, thank you, to be polite, but I'm not letting it fall into my spirit, because I don't know if it was DMX, one rapper said this, just as easily as people can praise you, they can take it back and bring you down. So yeah, I'm yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it's totally true. And I think that we see that in a lot of different aspects of our life, that people take, they take things back. They like you until they don't like you no more.
I can't follow that up. I think you hit it on. I think you hit the nail on the head right there. Let's start focusing on
I want you to plug, and I know Kenyetta's always saying, you're always making me do things and be actionable. I want you to let people know who you are and what you're doing, and plug 6 Gen Venture Studio.
Well, 6 Gen Studio is, I'm working on my proof of concept right now. I know that capitalism is pretty much the bread and butter of the world, but the way that companies are run today, actually, I want to show you guys this book here. Hold on one second.
you have been watching the Blackout Live from New York with your host, Tasemere, me, where we explore trends in business, talk about the diaspora of Black folks, and
get my slippers flopping in the background.
How we can just be better. So we have been talking today about the term privilege with Miss Kenyetta S. Rose.
Yeah, so Section Venture Studio is exploring new ways for African Americans to build their companies. So one is us harnessing our resources to fund our own goddamn companies. Let's fund our own damn companies is my mantra. And two, building out a studio structure where we thinking of new ways to build companies. So taking our solopreneur companies and scaling them to actual companies using strategies that are more innate and aligned with who we are. So, and saying that, I'm going to plug this book right here. And thinking about new ways to build our own businesses that are more aligned with the Black soul is the book I'm reading now. So I'm currently building out the proof of concept on how the Section Studio is going to look. And I'm using this book as a backdrop.
Oh, cool. The title was African American Management History.
So using a more cooperative approach to building companies, as opposed to the very Western way of thinking about it. Because I think one of the reasons why we haven't been able to scale companies is because we've been trying to be something that we're not. Mm-hmm. So I think it's about us going back to who we were when we were actually building companies in this country post-slavery and using that. So that's what Section Studio is going to be implementing, in addition to leveraging community resources to fund our own goddamn companies.
I love it. And I talked to Kenyetta dearly. I don't know if I can stress that enough. Kenyetta is one of the people that I usually call on, and I'm like, girl, can you talk to me about this? Girl, let me tell you what just happened. You're not going to believe this. And this is very odd because sometimes it's hard to just find other people that you can just be very transparent with and people that accept that. Because sometimes when you're too transparent, people kind of like run away because you're like, you're on another level that I'm not on yet, and I don't want to talk about those things. But Kenyetta has definitely been somebody that I have been calling on a lot. And Eva is my spirit animal. I'm always like, I need to be like Eva when I grow up. So thank you. Any closing statements you want to make about the topic of today?
I take what you said about focusing on our own privilege and leaning more into that as opposed to what we've been doing, which is leaning into white privilege and relinquishing our power to it. Let's start leaning more into the privilege that we do have, scale it and amplify that and focus on that, because one of the most potent laws of the universe is whatever you focus on expands. So let's focus on the privilege that we do have, which is we do have the melanin. We have the Midas touch is actually the melanin touch. I'm telling you, the Midas, write this down when you want. This is my last statement, and that's it. The Midas touch is the melanin touch. That means whatever we pursue, we will excel in it. And that in of itself is privilege.
Are you gonna coin this term?
I probably should. I don't know who cares enough. Seems like you right now. That's good for me. No, the Midas touch is the melanin touch. That whatever we do excels. We move the world. Remove us, and then what is the state of the world? Okay, you've got technology, but then what? I don't know. Maybe not even that. I'm not sure. But I'm going to end it on a high note there. The Midas touch is the melanin touch. Whatever we do will excel. So let's stop focusing on their privilege. We know it's there, but we have our own privileges and our own power. And I just believe that we are gods. I'm actually reading a book about it.
I don't know how you are. You know what? I don't know how you are finding the time to read these books.
Oh, we won't discuss it, but in my Paul Mooney face.
I need to factor this in. I have a couple books that I need to read, and I'm trying to figure out when to do it because I'm not an audio book reader. I'm still very old school. Like I need to feel the book in my hand. So I gotta figure out how I'm gonna get more reading in because I think that's important.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, if it's the audio, that's good too. Or if it's just you watching the words on the screen, whatever. But yeah, I have the time, and we know why. But that's another conversation. I always make the time for reading. I'm a bibliophile. I love books. So
Kenyetta is moonlights as a comedian. If you guys haven't picked that up yet, I constantly tell her that I think she can also be a comedian of sorts. Well, I won't keep you any longer. I know it's 8 a.m. since you've been on over there.
Oh, okay. No, that's fine.
I know. I got you up super early.
Yeah, you get me up, man. These Saturdays, man. Oh, man. It's like, oh, God. You can do it. Be disciplined. Honor your word.
Well, thank you for hanging out with me, chopping it up with me today.
Powerful conversation. Thank you for having me. I learned a lot from you today, so thank you.
I learned a lot from you too. You are more than welcome to come back anytime. My returning commutator, Kenyetta S. Rose, was here in the building.
Brooklyn, stand up.
The Blackout live from New York with your host, Tasemere. See you next week. Ciao.
Ciao.